campers, rise and shine, but don't go outside, 'cause it's COVID out there.
So wash your little hands and dry. There ain't no reason.
Rise and shine, but don't go outside, 'cause it's COVID.
So wash your little hands and there ain't no reason you should go outside. Quarantine, babe.
Okay, campers, rise and shine, but don't go outside, 'cause it's COVID out there. But today is Sunday, so at least we get to worship with our church family from home.
Sunday.
When the days feel like they just run together, Sunday comes along and puts that smile right back on your face.
Just make sure it's at least 6 feet.
All right, well, welcome to Sunday morning, the only day of the week that you know it's Sunday. You know the day of the week because there's something to look forward to, I hope. We have started a new series called The Miracles That Jesus Did. I hope that you're enjoying looking more closely at the miracles that Jesus did and knowing that they're not just miracles, but they're signs. They have a deeper message embedded within them, encrypted, kind of like his parables that not everyone understood. He had to explain them sometimes to the disciples, and some of the people around them heard and they tried to make this or that of them, but they didn't quite get it because they had preconceived notions, ideas that they just couldn't get past, and that blinded them from being able to see what Jesus was really talking about because they thought things should be this way, and Jesus was telling them the way things actually were. Well, for us, some of these signs, some of these miracles are even more encrypted than they were for the folks in the first century. And the reason why is because 2,000 years have passed since Jesus told these stories and did these miracles. I mean, 2,000 years and another language, another culture, different customs, different worldviews. So a lot has changed, and so we have to get back to the root of what did people see, what did people hear, what did things mean to them at that time, at that point, at that place in history. So we're going to unpack the miracles, and we're going to look for the message. This week and next week, go ahead and grab your swimsuit because we're going to the pool. Did you know that there are actually a lot of pools in Israel in the first century? Kind of strange because it's a very desert area that's fairly arid, and they had to go to great lengths in order to be able to make contact with water supplies and to store water, and yet they had these swimming pools, and some of them quite large. Herod had large swimming pools at his desert fortresses. An example of this would be his fortress and palace in Jericho. In Jericho, he had this beautiful fortress, and if you look to the right of the screen, you'll see a giant swimming pool there. Now, Herod would go there during the wintertime in Jerusalem when it got around 45 to 55 degrees. Well, he said, well, that's too cold for him. So he went down to Jericho, kind of like a lot of people go south during the winter from Michigan down into Florida or Texas or other places, Arizona, Alabama, and this is where he hung out because this was in the Rift Valley, the lowest place on the planet Earth. And it was typically between the 70s and 80s in Jericho when it was between the 40s and 50s in Jerusalem. And so he had his swimming pool there. Also had some bathhouses up to the north, those buildings that have the dome on top of them. Those are bathhouses. There were hot baths. There were medium warm baths. There were cool baths. And so he had everything right there in the middle of the wilderness. And then the Herodium. Here's a picture of the Herodium, the mountain that actually Herod made into a mountain by building it up instead of fortress on top. And down at the bottom is a palace and a large swimming pool area. I mean, this thing is so large that small boats could actually go on. And they'd take the boats across into the middle where there was sort of a gazebo of sorts where they could sit and talk and chat, dine and have drinks and be out kind of secluded in the middle of this gigantic swimming pool. This next slide is a slide of a picture that I took up from the fortress looking down. I mean, this is quite a ways. So just to show you the footprint of that swimming pool with the remains of that gazebo in the middle, it is just gigantic. And then there's probably his most famous of all swimming pools was in Caesarea Maritima on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea on the western coast of Israel. So here is where he built a harbor. Actually, the first time that they used cement that they was able to solidify underwater in this region. And he built a harbor here so that they wouldn't have to go southern places or northern places. He could have his own harbor and lots of trading could go on right here. And he made a palace over there. You'll see out there the most prominent building that you see is a temple to Augustus. And then beyond that is his palace that is made out projecting into the water. And what is cool is that he had this swimming pool that he made in the midst of the palace. It's a freshwater swimming pool in the midst of a saltwater sea so that you could go swimming in fresh water just for the contrast. Herod loved contrast. He loved doing things that seemed to be impossible. And so this was a swimming pool, and this next slide is a picture that I took last year when I was visiting, and that's the remains of his swimming pool, the imprint, and you can actually see out in the background a couple fishermen are fishing along the edges, and I went down and dipped my feet into Herod's swimming pool, and the water was quite warm. It was a good time. So the Jewish people also had pools, more community swimming pools, but they weren't really places you went to swim laps. They served a special purpose. They were ritual purity pools. This week and next week we're going to visit two of those pools in Jerusalem with Jesus. The first is a large pool that was actually rediscovered in 2004. It's called the Pool of Siloam. Let's enter the story. John chapter 9, verses 1 through 11. John 9, 1 through 11. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus. "But this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Having said this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was. Others said, "Nah, he only looks like the man." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they demanded. He replied, "The man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see." Let's stop there. The setting is Jerusalem. It's during the Feast of Tabernacles, which we know from chapters 7 and 8. And Jesus is somewhere in the vicinity of the temple area in Jerusalem. And he's walking along, and as he walks along, he sees a blind man. And the man is likely begging, because the temple is a good place to do your begging, because people are coming on pilgrimage. They're feeling rather charitable. They want to be right with God. And so those who don't divert their eyes, most people don't see the beggars, do they? I mean, we understand. We pull up to a stoplight, and on the corner there's someone with a cardboard sign, and we're hoping that the light is going to stay green so that we can just pass through and not have the awkwardness. We're really hoping that we're not stopped at the light, the first in line right there. And if we're second or third, we're going to try to divert our eyes and pretend like we don't notice, right? People have been doing this for thousands of years, mind you. And so Jesus is walking along, and he sees the blind man, and that's special, and that's important. He doesn't divert his eyes. The blind man, of course, isn't just some random man. He represents humanity. He represents you, and he represents me. Find yourself in the story. Whenever you read the Bible, find yourself in the story, not just in the heroes, but especially in those who need some work. This man represents the predicament of humanity. The story and the people in it and what they say represents the opinions of humanity. And it begins with our blindness. Verse 2 says the disciples, you know that they heard opinions and they had opinions, and so they ask a question. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? You see, they already have the answers. Like, it's either this or this, and people are kind of debate which one it's going to be. It's kind of a common thought of the time that bad things happen for a reason. It's sort of like Jewish karma, if you will. If something bad happened to you, that's because you did something bad. So Jewish folks argued about this, and there were even different kind of extreme theologies, like if a woman was pregnant and she had sinned, that sin could affect her newborn child. Or someone even more outrageously and said that it was possible for a fetus to sin while it was in the womb. I mean, if you think about anything for too long, you're going to come up with some crazy ideas. And then you're going to support them with all sorts of logical rationale. And we can make the craziest things, if you just think about it, seem perfectly logical. Watch out for that. Blindness isn't just literal in this story, right? The story is real. It happened. It's a real story that happened in history, but it's also a metaphor. The disciples' question reveals their own blindness. Chapter 8 reveals the blindness of the religious leaders. If you went back, they see Jesus, that he's doing these things, he's saying these things, but they don't see that he's the Messiah. They don't accept that he's from God. This story is in this place, in this Bible, for a reason. But the one who sees us wants to see us. That's Jesus. This is Jesus' work, the continuation of creation and restoration. So he starts talking about night and day, and this brings you back to the earliest chapters in Genesis. He's about to do some creating. Verse 6, having said this, he spit on the ground and made some mud. Do you see it? Gross, right? Why is he doing that? Well, from the dirt of the earth, the Adama in Hebrew, he's going to make eyes for Adam. This man isn't made blind so that God can do a miracle. The disciples are just asking the wrong kinds of questions. They're asking, why did this happen, right? The same kind of questions that we ask, which really are looking for someone to blame or something to blame. It's more of a negation than anything else. But Jesus is more interested in what God is going to do about it. The solution, the restoration, the glorification of who and what God is like. Verse 4, Jesus says, while it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. What is Jesus' work? Creation and restoration. That is why he has been sent. And so we come to our sending. Okay, so sending is a huge theme in this passage. You've got to see that. The sending that's going on in this passage comes up again and again. Verse 4, Jesus talks about his being sent from the Father. And in verse 7, Jesus sends a blind man to do what Jesus instructs. Go, he told him, wash in the Pool of Siloam. And just to make sure you don't miss it, John says and adds, this word means sent, right? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, pick up what I'm laying down. So Jesus sends a blind man to a pool called Siloam, called sending. And we remember Jesus' words, as the Father has sent me, so I am sending you. The Pool of Siloam. The Pool of Siloam was first built by King Hezekiah around 720 BC. What happened is that the Assyrian king Sennacherib had come and defeated the northern kingdom called Israel, and Hezekiah is ruling over the southern part of Israel, which is a new kingdom in itself, and it's called Judah. And he knows that Sennacherib's probably coming to Jerusalem next. He's probably going to want to conquer the southern kingdom as well. And so Hezekiah is assessing the defenses, is assessing how well they're going to be able to stay safe in Jerusalem. And he notices that the Gihon spring, which is the main water source in Jerusalem during that time, is pretty vulnerable. And so he has his men dig an underground passageway that we now refer to as Hezekiah's tunnel, in order to bring the water from the Gihon spring to a safer part of the city on the western side. If you look at the map on the west, you can see the red line, and the northernmost part is the Gihon spring. It comes down, does a bit of a S-curve, and it lands at the Pool of Siloam, which at the time was just a reservoir that people in that region could come and they could safely get their water without threat from those who might be laying siege to the city. Now, later on, that tunnel is continued to be used, but the Hasmonean kings in 152 to 37 BC make it into a pool. Now, it's not just like your typical local swimming pool, but rather it's a ritual bathing pool. It's for a large community of people to come and use and to become ritually clean in. So in this idea is kind of like a big mikvah. A mikvah was a ritual cleaning bath. Go ahead to show the mikvah. There it is. This is a mikvah from the Qumran community, the Essene community. And this was a small community mikvah. And what they would do is go down the stairs. They would dunk themselves, kind of where we get our idea of baptism from. And they would rise up out of the water, and they would come up, and they would be ritually purified. Well, this pool is set in Jerusalem, and the southernmost point, and it is used for people that are coming, the Jewish folks, the Jewish pilgrims, could come and they could dunk into that pool. That's why you see those stairs there. The water level would be different levels depending on the time of year. Remember, there's not a lot of water in Jerusalem or in Israel. So in the spring, when the waters are coming down from Mount Hermon, way in the north, the snows are melting, and other places where the snows are melting, and they're rushing down into the wadis and filling the Jordan River and coming down. The springs are going to be gushing, and the pool's going to be quite full. But later, after the summer goes on and evaporation happens and those wadis aren't running anymore, the pool's going to continue to go down. But they're going to have those stairs. They're going to go down the platform, and wherever they can, go down to the lowest point. There's little platforms that they can stand on and dunk themselves and come back up and be ritually pured. And then they would journey up to Jerusalem and to the temple by the Pilgrim's Road. Here's a picture of Jerusalem in the time of Jesus. At the southernmost point, you can see the Pool of Siloam there. And then you see a red line that leads right up to the temple, and people would walk that Pilgrim's Road, which you can actually walk today because it's been recently rediscovered, excavated, actually runs under the current city now, and just opened last year where you can actually walk that Pilgrim's Road. It leads up to the southern part of the temple, which was the main stairway and entryway into the temple at the time. This Pool of Siloam itself was rediscovered in 2004 by some pipe workers who were trying to fix a sewage line, and they came down and found some steps as they were digging and stopped all things as they do and called the Archaeological Society to come in and do a dig and see what it was. And sure enough, they discovered that they had uncovered the Pool of Siloam from the first century story with Jesus sends a man to this pool for healing. You see the steps and you can see the platform there. They are not able to uncover the whole thing because there are many houses and other buildings and land issues, but they're able to uncover a large portion of one side of the steps so you can get an idea of what it looked like and how large it was. Water from the Gihon spring actually still continues to feed this. Some water will still come in from that Gihon spring. Now, why does Jesus send the man to the Pool of Siloam? I mean, why not just heal him then and there, as he's done for others? I mean, it's not like he couldn't. Well, it was for no other reason than to give us a picture message, right? Jesus is always teaching. He's always sending messages, whether it be through parables or whether it be through signs and wonders and miracles or whether it be through how he deals with a situation. Now, it's the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles, which is renowned and has a renowned ritual of water drawing for the temple done here at the Pool of Siloam. So lots of people are going to be gathered around here for that water drawing ritual. And yet Chapters 7 and 8 tell us that the religious leaders were blind to the fact that God has sent the Messiah into their midst. Now, Jesus does a number of miracles that mimic Old Testament prophets and their miracles, usually in the same geographical regions as the prophets did them. For instance, last week we talked about the Syrophoenician woman or the Canaanite woman, and Jesus healed her daughter. Well, Elijah had been there some years earlier in the same region and also healed a non-Jewish woman's child in that same region. This was to confirm, because people knew those stories and accepted those people as prophets, when Jesus does the same kinds of things in the same regions, to make the connection that he's sent from God, that he has God's authority, God's stamp of approval, and his message is from God. But no prophet in the Old Testament ever opened the eyes of the blind. This miracle was reserved to be a sign for the Messiah that God would send. We read about it in Isaiah 42:7, which envisions the Messiah that God would be sending to open eyes that are blind, to free captives from prison, and to release from the dungeons those who sit in darkness. As Jesus has been sent by the Father, so he also sends us. He has been sent to create and to restore. So what does he send us for? Well, we might say, for evangelism. That actually is just the beginning of it. That's just a start. He doesn't send us just to get people to confess their sin and to confess that he is Lord. That's just the initiation. But instead, he sends us for our healing. 2 Kings 5 tells of a story of a man named Naaman. It's a healing story. He's the commander of the Syrian army. Syria is just northwest of Israel. And he serves under King Aram, and he has leprosy. Now, King Aram, having heard of Israel's prophet Elisha, sends Naaman to him in order to be healed. But Naaman isn't healed immediately. Interesting. He's told to go and wash 7 times in the Jordan. And here's the scripture of how Naaman responded. But Naaman went away angry and said, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. So he turned and he went off in a rage. But his friends convinced him, Naaman, why don't you just try doing what Elisha said? Try it. And so reluctantly he does. And he's healed. And the scripture goes on. It says, Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. These two stories are connected. When Jesus sends a man to wash, and only after he washes is going to be healed, Jewish ears who know their scriptures very well make the connections. And the connections aren't just with what happened in the story, but with the implications of the story. So as the man is sent, just like Elisha sent Naaman, and Naaman came back, now I know that your God is God. In the same way, this is a sign to the people that Jesus represents the one true God. We, humanity, you and I, are blind. We think we know, we think we see. And seeing us, Jesus sends us. And we don't often understand the route, we don't often understand the journey. We throw our hands up, we get angry, we cuss. And when we finally get to the end of ourselves, we cry. Like the disciples, we ask, why? Why doesn't God just wave his hand over me and make all the bad go away and all the good come my way? One commenter says, It is important to pause and imagine this blind man slowly and painstakingly working his way the half-mile through the crowded and twisting byways until he reached the pool. Even the journey was a walk of faith. especially as he was a known figure in those parts. And people would ask him why the curious wads of mud were on his face and where was he headed. I love that. Even the journey was a walk of faith. Even the journey was a walk of faith. Friends, our lives, our journey is a walk of faith. And it's part of the healing process. And this is the work that Jesus came to do, to heal, to restore. Not just our mortal bodies. I mean, everyone wants to be physically healed, but that's really not God's main objective. But rather the healing of our immortal souls. The image or the imprint of God in us. Why was this man born blind? This happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. God did not cause it, but his goodness is revealed in our healing, on our restoration. And God creates, and God makes us whole. That is what he is doing in us. Verse 8. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was. Others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." This man's transformation and restoration was so complete that some couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe that it was the same person. Do you see it? Do you see the message? Can you see the message beneath the miracle? God is sending us toward our transformation, toward our healing. The way to it is difficult because we can't see it. We can't understand all the whys of it, why and where we're going. But we can have faith that the journey is toward our restoration. In conclusion, the story of the miracle at the Pool of Siloam is the story of an amazing grace. John Newton grew up in the 1700s to become a slave ship master and trader. He admitted to treating captives abhorrently. He was blind to their humanity, and he was blind to his own inhumanity. In 1754, after becoming deathly ill on one of these sea voyages where he's bringing slaves from West Africa to their captive homes, Newton cried out to God, and he had a deep realization of his own depravity and his own blindness. In the end, after God healed him, he abandoned his life as a slave trader, and he wholeheartedly devoted his life to God. Later, he would fight alongside the likes of William Wilberforce to abolish the African slave trade, testifying to its horrors firsthand because he was one of those that mistreated those. Newton was no longer the man that he used to be. People could hardly even recognize him. He had changed so much. And it was he who penned the song that we'll close with today, Amazing Grace.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind.